info. She is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello, dear listeners, spooks and specters, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. I bid you all good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are across the 24 time zones. My name is Jeff, and I will be your control operator, the bucket of blood perched above your head, that jumble of clothes on a chair in your bedroom that turns into something evil when the lights are off. If you have just found the Ghost Signal for the first time, I hope you like what you hear. But if you are a return listener, welcome back. This is episode 20, Don't Open Evil Inside, part 3, in which we will conclude the story of the Tallman family of Henriken, Wisconsin. We will also be creeping it real with a story from a famously haunted hotel and alleged footage of something otherworldly. If you like what you hear, please consider visiting theghostsignalpodcast.com, where you will find links to email me haunting tales of your own, to browse merchandise, to the Ghost Signal Patreon, and the path to the Discord server, where you can interact with me and others directly. Now, dear listeners, let's keep on creeping on.
Here's a question. Have you seen a ghost? Reports of ghost sightings and paranormal activity are on the rise this year.
It's a trend across Raleigh and the country. New at 11, CBS 17's Bridget Chapman getting answers about what it could be.
Experts say reports of paranormal activity are spiking this year. Claims of unusual noises, movements, and feelings. NOS says their emails about activity in people's homes shot up 50% in March.
Spooky piece of footage circulating online appears to show a ghost child dash past the camera of a person staying in a notoriously haunted hotel in Arkansas. Posted on Reddit late last week, the eerie video was reportedly filmed at the Crescent Hotel and Spa in the city of Eureka Springs. Constructed in 1886, the building has long been said to be the home of a variety of spirits and has even been called America's most haunted hotel by many individuals. In the video, an unnamed woman films around her room and makes note of the site's haunted reputation, declaring that she and her friend, who is seen resting on a nearby bed, are, quote, looking for ghosts at the infamous site. Chillingly, it would seem that the pair did not have to wait too long or look very far for the spirits said to inhabit the building as, while the woman is talking, a mysterious form that bears a striking resemblance to a young child can be seen scurrying past the camera. When the woman filmed her friend seconds earlier, it appeared that the pair were the only people in the room, and she has no reaction to the youngster that just ran a few feet in front of her. Making the creepy scene all the more intriguing is that the child seems to make no noise, which is rather incongruous with what one might expect to hear from a rambunctious child dashing around a room. Alas, since the witnesses are unidentified, any additional circumstances surrounding the video are a mystery. That said, in light of the location of the scene and the odd manner in which the suspected child appears without any sound, Many observers have suggested that the woman captured a genuine apparition at the haunted hotel. Skeptical viewers will, of course, argue that the ghost child is simply a real youngster that somehow went unseen earlier in the video, either by happenstance or as a way of creating a well-crafted hoax. The video is on the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, under the News tab. Watch it and judge for yourself if the footage is authentic or not. What new hell awaits the Tallman family? How much longer can they possibly live in their house? Will there be a part 4 to the story? These answers and more await, dear listener. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
As we left Alan Tallman, he was in his daughter's bedroom putting them to sleep for the night. Just as he was about to leave the room, a translucent, shimmering fog in the approximate shape of a human raised its arm at him and proclaimed, "You're dead." As it seemed about to envelop him, the figure dissipated in a burst of light. Alan staggered out of the bedroom. His wife thought he was having a heart attack. He looked stunned, almost paralytic in his movements. He was completely white and his lips were purple, Deborah said of her husband. He stumbled into the wall, ran into the birdcage, and he just looked at me, tears coming down his face. He wouldn't tell me what had happened. He just kept saying, "Leave me alone, leave me alone." Deborah quickly telephoned Pastor DeBratz and begged him to come over. She choked back tears as she described Alan's behavior. Something must have happened to Alan in the bedroom, she told her pastor, but he wouldn't tell her. Reverend DeBratz said he would be right over. Deborah returned to her husband, who by now had collapsed in a chair at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands. Again she asked him what was wrong, and he told her the incredible story. Within a few minutes their pastor had arrived. The household was in chaos. The children had been awakened by their father's cries and were sobbing, and neither of the girls had awakened during their father's actual ordeal in the bedroom. Pastor DeBratz urged the couple to leave the house immediately and not to return until after church the next day, Sunday, January 10th. They needed no more persuasion. Suitcases were quietly packed and the family left for a relative's home. Deborah glanced at the garage as their car pulled out of the driveway. At the top of the garage door glowed a small, intense flame. She blinked and looked back, and the image was gone. She still isn't sure whether what she saw was real in any way or merely a byproduct of that chaotic night. The Tallmans awoke Sunday morning, planning to attend church services with Alan's family. However, a half hour before church, Alan discovered he couldn't start the car even after repeated attempts. We called the church and told Pastor DeBratz. He said that this didn't surprise him, Alan said. The pastor suggested the couple wait until after the church service had ended at 10:30 and then try the car again. At 10:45, Alan climbed in the car and turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The Tallmans believed the entity pursuing them simply did not want them to go to church. The family tried to outwit their unknown adversary. We thought that if whatever it was didn't want us to go to church and have communion, we would have the pastor come to our house on Sunday night and give us communion and bless our house. Pastor DeBratz came Sunday night, administered communion, and led the family in prayers. He also advised them to play religious music all night and handed them a stack of cassette tapes. They followed his advice and, according to Alan, it was one of the most peaceful nights we had since we moved into the house. The children didn't wake up. I got up a couple of times to check on them and never once did I feel anything was there. It seemed like whatever was there just could not tolerate that church music and just didn't want to come around. Monday, January 11th, dawned bright and very cold. It almost seemed like the prayers and recorded church hymns had worked in ridding the house of its evil presence. Kenny went off to school, Deborah puttered around the house, and Alan took care of some chores. Jonathan had volunteered to stay with Deborah and the children until Alan got home from his late shift. He came over after high school that afternoon. The night had passed quietly, but Deborah wasn't ready to face the darkness by herself. This would be the last day the Tallmans spent on South Larabee Street. Alan left for work at 2 o'clock. Twilight cast the street in deep shadows by 4:30. The sun set at a few minutes before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. At 6 o'clock, Alan called home from work. He asked if the house was quiet, and it was. He made Deborah promise to leave the church music playing, and she agreed. Jonathan had taken the children to play in the basement rumpus room. They were having a good time, Deborah told her husband over the phone. For once, Alan thought his children were at ease. He knew Jonathan liked the kids, and they in turn enjoyed having a big brother to play with. An hour and a half later, at about 7:30, Alan called back. Deborah told him that the children had come upstairs to get ready for bedtime. Jonathan promised them he would read and stay in the room until they fell asleep, just like their daddy did. Everything was calm, almost too calm, Deborah remembered later. She assured her husband in that 7:30 call that there had been no unusual events. Even Kenny seemed to have settled down. Alan hung up, promising that he would telephone again an hour later, but he never got the chance. Within 45 minutes, Deborah, Alan's nephew, and the 3 children were in the car sitting outside Alan's workplace. I had a habit of getting the kids ready for bed about 8 o'clock, but with what happened to Alan Saturday night, I didn't want to go to the room with the kids. Jonathan went back there. I was going to do some housework. God, that had to be the most horrible night of my life. I was doing the dishes, and all of a sudden he started screaming, "Debbie, Debbie, come quick, please come back here." Deborah couldn't move. The teenager was screaming at the top of his lungs from the bedroom, and the little girls were crying. That much Deborah knew, but she just couldn't face whatever had happened in that bedroom a few yards away. I just stood there. I didn't know what to do, but I ran to the phone to try to call the pastor, and he wasn't there. I could hear him crying out, "Debbie, come here, quick! Oh God! Oh my God!" I didn't know what was going on. Kenny had run into the living room. Deborah told him to go back and see what was wrong. I can't, Kenny cried back. Deborah screamed at him to go to the bedroom and come back and tell her what he saw. "Mom, it's there, I can see it," Kenny said breathlessly as he ran back into the living room. Marianne quickly followed Kenny out of the bedroom. "It's baby Jesus, and he loves you, don't be afraid," the child assured her mother between sobs. Deborah had tried to tell the children that any strange figure appearing in their room was Jesus, hoping the statement would calm them. This time it didn't work. I was running around the house saying, "No, that's not baby Jesus." Finally, Jonathan came out of the room. I asked him what happened, and he said it was in there. I asked him where Sarah was, and he said that she was still in the bedroom. I told him to get Sarah. That's it, we're leaving. We're not staying there anymore. I got our coats, and the kids were just hysterical. I said we were going to Daddy's work. I turned off all the lights, except for the one in Kenny's room. I wouldn't go back there to turn it off. And the one in the living room. I got them all in the car. And when I pulled out of the driveway and went past the house, Kenny said, Mom, it's looking out of the window at us." Deborah wouldn't dare to turn her head. She just took her son's word that something stared after them as they sped down South Larabee Street that frigid January night. The little band of refugees arrived at the factory where Alan worked a few minutes later. Jonathan and the children were crying. They begged Deborah not to leave them alone in the car, but she told them to lock the doors while she went inside to find Alan. He came around the corner and I looked at him and I said I wasn't going to take it anymore. I didn't care what happened. We were not going back there. I told him he had to come out to the car to talk to the kids, Deborah said. Jonathan was still too upset to describe what had taken place in the bedroom. Deborah called Pastor DeBratz and he told them to meet him at the church. Alan took his nephew in the car he had at work, and Deborah followed with the children in their other car. As he drove to the church, Alan found out what had taken place. Marianne and Sarah had been tucked in bed. A nightlight cast a faint glow about the room. Jonathan was stretched out on the floor, gazing at the ceiling, a glass of lemonade at his elbow. In the kitchen, he could hear Deborah washing dishes, while soft church hymns coming from a cassette player drifted down the short hallway from the living room. Jonathan yawned and turned over onto his stomach, his face toward the partially open bedroom door. He too was getting sleepy, listening to the little girl's even breathing and restful music. Suddenly, Sarah jumped up in bed. "Hi there," she called out. Jonathan thought he must have fallen asleep and that Deborah had slipped into the room. He rolled over onto his back and looked across the room, and it wasn't Deborah he saw. Hovering near Sarah's bed was a human figure, too indistinct for Jonathan to determine its gender, but nearly identical to the one Alan Tallman had witnessed a few days before. It moved toward Jonathan, and as it did, it spoke to him.
Now you're involved.
But as it moved forward, it melted away and was gone before it reached him. Jonathan started crying and called out for Deborah. Both girls were now wide awake. At the same time, Jonathan felt as if he were frozen to the floor, unable to move out of the path of the hideous entity. Kenny had been awakened. He caught a brief glimpse of the figure after Deborah asked him to go back into the bedroom. Jonathan was able to pry himself from the floor and stumble into the living room, upsetting his glass of lemonade in the process. Marianne got out of bed to follow after him, leaving little Sarah alone and frightened. Within minutes, Jonathan had gone back for her and, with Deborah and the other children, fled the house. After Alan heard the entire story, he realized that this had been their last night on Larabee Street. After the family conferred with Pastor DeBratz at the church, they decided to go to Alan's mother's home, but not before Alan insisted on driving by the house. Deborah refused to accompany him, still distraught and feeling somewhat guilty over her inability to cope with the trauma of the last few hours. I felt helpless. There my kids are, screaming. It could have been hurting the kids, but I didn't have any idea. I figured Kenny had seen it before, so he had at least some idea of what it looked like. But you can't go back there to the bedroom and shoot it. You can't hit it over the head. Later I felt real bad, but someone later said that I did the right thing, because if I had seen it and something happened to me, what would happen to the kids, you know? After we left the church, we got to the cars and Alan said he had to go down past the house. I said he was crazy. He said that everything we owned was in that house, and if it was on fire or something, he had to know. Alan had his car and I had my car, and he had Jonathan with him. I wasn't going past it, so I waited at the end of the block. He went down the block toward the house, and I sat at the end of the street in my car with the kids. I watched him go by the house, and he turned around and came back to where I was parked. He said, "You're not going to believe this, but every single light was on in that house. Every light in the basement, the garage light, all the yard lights were on, bathroom lights, the bedroom lights, the kids' room, everything." He said the house was lit up like a Christmas tree, and she only left 2 lights on. The family spent the night with Alan's mother, and once there they again called Pastor DeBratz to tell him every light in their house seemed to be on. Alan wanted to go back and turn them off. Pastor DeBratz said the house was lit up, but it's not costing you a dime. There's no energy there, Alan said. It's this thing that's giving the house energy to show that there's lights on in the house. No one else can see it from outside. He said if I went back in that house, I'd never come back. Alan decided to wait until daylight to return to Larabee Street. Early the next morning, Tuesday, January 12th, Deborah called the pastor to tell him that they had to return to the house to get some belongings. It was their intention to leave permanently and to stay with relatives until they could figure out what to do, and to get their lives back in order. Pastor DeBratz told them to be prepared for anything when they returned to their home. What they did find surprised them, but not in any way they expected. We walked in, and every light in the house was turned off except for the living room light, which I had left on. But the bedroom light that I left on in Kenny's room was switched off, Deborah said. Alan continues, I checked every window in the house. I looked down in the basement. To me, this whole thing could not be possible, even though I'd seen it. It was still mind-boggling. This can't be happening to us, you know, it can't be true. Things can't make my house light up like the pastor said, and yet have no energy going through the light bulbs. Alan couldn't find any problem that would account for the glowing lights he saw in and around their house the night before. All the lights seemed to work fine when they were switched on. The Tallmans took clothes, small pieces of furniture, some children's toys, and Alan also gathered up his valuable gun collection. Other than that, they left their other possessions for another day. Neither one sensed anything odd or unusual in the house that morning, but that didn't surprise them. It seemed during the day it was just like any other house, Deborah emphasized. A few days later, Alan, with the help of several church members, packed the rest of the family's belongings. They timed their work so the job would be completed before sundown. For several days, the Tallmans wrestled with the question of where they would live and what was to be done with their house. His mother was willing to shelter them until they could find other accommodations. But on Thursday night, January 21st, the problems in the house on South Larabee Street became general knowledge, and the Tallmans became subjects of intense public and media scrutiny. On that night, Henrican Police Chief Douglas D. Glayman called Alan at work. He had heard rumors of a ghost house in Henrican, he told Alan, one that belonged to the Tallmans. He wanted to know if that was true. After a long pause, Alan admitted that he and his family had fled their house a week before, believing it was haunted. Chief Glayman suggested that he meet with the family to determine if there was anything his department could do to help. He said there were already reports of cars driving by the house and curious spectators wandering around the yard. There had even been some inquiries from the media, he said. Never did we realize that it would go to this length, Deborah said. It just floored us completely. The police chief contacting us, people going past our house. At first we couldn't believe it. We had enough problems to deal with, and then we had this other stuff going on too. But nobody knew how to help us. I mean, we didn't know where we were going, but we knew we couldn't go back to Larabee Street. That was just the beginning of the intense skepticism voiced by Henrican residents toward the events and the sensational media interest in the Tallmans' experience. While the Tallmans stayed with relatives, the Henrican rumor mills were passing along what allegedly had happened in the house. A driverless snowblower clearing the sidewalks and driveway, a ceiling that dripped blood, coffee cups floating through the air, and a fiery hole to hell that opened in the house. None of these events ever occurred, but their repetition, along with skimpy details of what had actually taken place, was enough to cause lines of cars to crowd South Larabee Street, which the police eventually had to cordon off. Doug Glayman is a handsome, dark-haired officer of the law, with a penetrating gaze and no-nonsense manner about him. He was just 32, already a 10-year veteran of the police force, when he first met with the Tallmans and helped them get through their ordeal. According to Deborah Tallman, he was a lifesaver. He is the one that kept us floating through all this. Without him, we would have just sunk. Chief Glayman, a Henrican native who had left a factory job because it was too routine to become a policeman, first heard about the Tallmans on January 21st. Chief Glayman said, "One of my night shift officers came in and asked me if I had heard that we have a haunted house in Henrican. I just laughed and carried on with what I was doing. But I bumped into him 5 minutes later, and he said that he was serious. It's all over town, he told me. That was early in the morning, and all throughout the day, wherever I went, people were asking me about this. I didn't even know where the house was. I started hearing rumors that there was a house with blood running out of the walls and other stuff." Late that afternoon, the police department received an anonymous telephone call from someone in the Tallmans neighborhood. The caller wanted to know if the police knew about anything going on nearby. Chief Glayman eventually discovered that the house being discussed was owned by Alan and Deborah Tallman. One neighbor admitted to the chief that the family had left the house, but refused to discuss the situation any further. With some basic police work, Chief Glayman found out where Alan worked and that he was scheduled that night. "I called him at work," the police chief said, "and told him who I was and that I had heard some rumors, and that I'd like to hear it from the fellow who should know best." His initial response was that he didn't want to talk about it. I asked him why, and he said I'd probably lock him up, thinking he was crazy. I said, "Listen, in this business I hear a lot of bizarre stories." I said, "Why don't you just tell me the story and we'll see what I can do for you." After 5 or 10 minutes of coaxing, Alan told Glayman the general outline of the family's experiences. The veteran officer listened and then suggested that Alan and his wife come down to police headquarters the following morning. After some hesitation, Alan agreed. Chief Glayman wanted the face-to-face meeting so he could look Alan in the eye and see if this was all on the up and up or not. The couple arrived at police headquarters in the basement below the town library at about 9 o'clock the next morning. Their behavior was the first indication for the chief that something was seriously wrong. Debbie was kind of high-strung and had a nervous laugh. Alan hardly had any eye contact with me. He was always staring at his watch or his shoes. It seemed his emotions and his will to survive were just drawn right out of him. Glayman said Alan looked to be near exhaustion. They informed me then that they were working with their pastor on trying to understand the trauma they had just gone through, Glayman said. They were very strong that they wanted to keep it quiet. I said I can do it. If you tell me you don't want something out, we can do that for you. Glayman wasn't able to keep his promise, though. Throughout that Friday and into the weekend, word spread quickly around town about the ghost house on South Larabee Street. The crowd at a local high school basketball game Friday night was abuzz with rumors of what had transpired. Scores of cars drove down Larabee Street. Dozens of people tried the doors and windows of the Tallman's house, all hoping to get a peek at what was inside. Police had to erect barricades at either end of the street and made several arrests for disorderly conduct or public drunkenness. One man showed up with a Bible in hand, promising that he would exorcise the ghost by shouting, "Devil be gone." He was arrested. On Sunday night, January 24th, WMTV-TV in Madison, Wisconsin, aired the first television report about the haunting. But as in the other television, radio, and newspaper stories for the first several days, the Tallmans were not identified by name, nor did they personally speak with any reporter. They were adamant about not wanting publicity. The media seemed satisfied to report rumors of blood-spewing walls and runaway snowblowers without trying to verify any of the happenings. Gleeman tried to oblige requests for all the media interviews he could fit into his schedule. When the number of reporters grew too large, he held a press conference to try to squelch some of the more outrageous speculation. I stood up and said there's no blood coming out of the walls and there's no snowblower running around by itself. I'm not telling you the people's names, I'm not giving out the address, and I'm not telling you what we discussed with the family, Gleeman recalled. While he was trying to handle dozens of media inquiries, Gleeman also wanted to do something to help the Tallmans. We went into the home with the pastor from their church one evening at about 9 o'clock, Gleeman said of his personal inspection of the Tallman home on Monday, January 25th. 2 police officers accompanied Pastor DeBratz. The minister wanted to do something in there, some provoking to see if he could get things stirred up, and the 2 policemen went along to be witnesses. I told them to look for any kind of projection devices or any kind of recorder. They went through the whole house. Both of the officers were wearing voice-activated tape recorders through the whole ordeal, and nothing unusual came on the tape. Gleeman's officers examined drapery rods to see if the dust that often accumulates there had been disturbed, thus indicating that some sort of instrument could have been hidden up there to produce the ghostly images. The men didn't see anything unusual. The only unsettling incident occurred when the telephone rang several times, but on each occasion the line seemed dead. One officer disabled the receiver, or assumed he had, but the phone rang anyway with no one on the line. Chief Gleeman and Henriken's mayor, who wanted to see the inside of the house for himself, arrived an hour or 2 after the officers and Pastor DeBratz examined the house. I was in the house maybe a half an hour, Gleeman said. A very warm, cozy little house, a nice house. I was really impressed. The furniture they had was nice, the decoration of the house just made you feel like you were home. I had some apprehension about going in there. You're wondering if something is going to pop out of the wall. What troubled Gleeman the most was not finding any logical explanation for the events of either natural or supernatural origin. That was the hard part. First of all, this is the type of complaint most police departments, I found out later, don't investigate. Secondly, we're trained to look for the physical things in life. That's part of our job. There's a reason for everything, and when you run into something like this, it was very frustrating for us. We're seeing the Tallmans' depression and their anxiety, yet we can't help them. From the chief's first interview with Alan and Deborah, he fully believed that the family had gone through a wrenching, emotionally draining experience. He wasn't willing, however, to accept the notion of a haunting, but neither was he prone to dismiss their incredible story outright. I spent a good deal of time with them and the kids, Gleeman said. The way they looked, the way they went through some kind of ordeal. I can't tell you exactly what, but the way they looked, I could believe that they'd either been truthful about their experiences or something else equally as strange had happened to them. After living for several months in an old house provided by friends from church, Alan and Deborah bought a small home in another Wisconsin city, financed with a new FMHA loan. Their lives returned to normalcy, but the important question lingered. Why did all of this happen to them? If there would be some way that we could know why it happened, Deborah said. I've always said that everything in life happens for a purpose, and I keep feeling that there must have been some purpose behind this. If I could figure out what the reason was, or if somebody could come to us and say this was it, we would have an answer. But there's no answer, and that's the hard part. Alan and Deborah Tallman, Kenny, Marianne, and Sarah now lead relatively quiet lives, although there are occasional reminders of their lives in Hurricane. Deborah occasionally meets people who ask about their experiences. A few express outright disbelief, while others are sympathetic or just simply curious. The farther away it gets in time, the better it is, Deborah said. She said she doesn't care if people don't believe what happened to them. She knows that some sort of supernatural event drove them away from Hurricane, and if people have a hard time understanding that, well, so be it. Alan has a hard time with it, Deborah said. He still doesn't understand what happened to them or why, she said. Sometimes a loud noise will frighten him and make him realize he still hasn't let go, so he can get on with his life. Kenny is a student who is occasionally reminded of his home in Hurricane. Once a friend asked him if he had ever been in a haunted house, referring to a carnival attraction at the upcoming Wisconsin State Fair. Kenny misunderstood the question and said, "Yes, but I don't want to go there again." Marianne sometimes remembers her mother's attempt to persuade her that any mysterious figures in her room were not to be feared. The child asks, "Why doesn't Jesus visit me anymore?" Little things have changed with the family. Alan and Deborah almost always take the children with them. I never feel comfortable leaving them with the babysitter. Maybe my sister will look after them occasionally, but that's it, Deborah said. The family tries to avoid reliving the events, or talking about it unless someone brings it up. Even then, Deborah is careful about what she says. She has refused numerous interviews, including an appearance on the popular Oprah Winfrey Show. It's always there, Deborah said. When it's dark outside is when it's the hardest. I don't know what it was. I guess we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I just can't believe that whatever was there came when we came and left when we left. Maybe the house was out to get us, or we were caught between some sort of opposing forces. Deborah is content with our lives today. This new house is our real dream home. Our life has changed for the better, our kids are comfortable, and the house is perfect. This is our place in life. A significant part of the population will not believe in the paranormal until it happens to them. But to those few who have experienced the unexplainable, going from skeptic to believer, you are not alone. And that's it for episode 20. If you've made it all the way to the end, you have my sincerest gratitude, dear listener. With the paranormal podcast market as oversaturated as it is, it's difficult to get noticed. But if you like what you hear, please spread the word. Visit the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, to drop me a line, get into the Discord server, or check out the Ghost Signal Patreon. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, Patreon by Brooks Bigley, creative direction by Cassie, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing by Hale, and I'm your ghost host with the most, Control Operator Jeff. Next time on the Ghost Signal is the tale of a New Orleans socialite by day, serial killer by night, known to the world as Madame Delphine LaLaurie. Until then, dear listeners, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.